So let's continue with the third and last part of question number 2. So it's asking us to find f of g to the negative 1 of x, right? So in order to get this answer, or to begin this question, we will have to use the previous answer we got for f of g of x, which equals to x minus 2 over 6x. So in order to find the inverse of it, we would have to change the x variables to y's and the y's to x's. So what I mean is, instead of y equals x minus 2 over 6x, we have to change the y to the x and the x to the y's, right? So you're gonna change the y to x, that equals to y minus 2 over 6y. So let's read it again here. Y minus 2 over 6y. In order to get rid of the denominator, we would have to multiply 6y to both sides, right? 6y. And then since they multiply by each other, they cancel out. So you are left with 6yx equals y minus 2. As we write it over here, 6yx equals y minus 2. So in order to get rid of the y and move it to the left, what we have to do is subtract y on both sides. So they cancel out. These won't cancel out because since it's not adding or subtracting the y, in this case, it wouldn't cancel out either way. So you're left with 6yx minus y equals negative 2. So so as you can see, both terms have a y, right? So we can easily factor them out. So of course both have a y in common, so you leave the y outside the parentheses. And then whatever you're left with, 6x, and since the negative is here and there's a 1 in front of the y, you're gonna put and leave the negative 1 in the inside, and then bring this down, which equals to negative 2. So in order to get rid of this, you have to divide it on both sides, right? So you do 6x minus 1 or 6x minus 1 on both sides. These cancel out. You are left with y equals negative 2 over 6x minus 1. You cannot leave it like that, so rewrite again the question. F of g to negative 1 over x equals to negative 2 over 6x minus 1. So this is your answer for the third and last section of the question. Okay, so we'll be starting the third and final question. So we are given the function of f of x, which equals to x squared plus 1. They're also telling us that the graph of f will be translated 3 units to the left, then reflected about the x-axis, then translated 2 units down to create the graph of g, and we will be able to determine the domain and range of g. So first what we can do is come up with some points in order to be able to graph here. So we're going to create an x and y, create it longer. So we can use negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we substitute your x's into the x, and it will give you your y. So for example, negative 3 squared equals 9. 9 plus 1 is 10. Same thing with this one and all the others. Negative 2 over to the exponent of 2 plus 1 is 5. 1 squared plus 1 is 2. 0 squared plus 1 is 1. 1 squared plus 1 is 2. 2 squared plus 1 is 5. And 3 squared plus 1 is 10. So we can graph it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we can do negative 3 over 10. So this will be way up here. Negative 2, 2, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're left with negative 1 and 2. Negative 1, 2, 0, 1. And it will be able to determine that this is your minimum point. 1, 2, 2, 5. It's right here. And 3, 10 is all the way over here. So this is your function that we're left with. So we are told that the translation will be of 3 units to the left, 3 units to the left, which will give us f, x, and since it's always the opposite, so if you're going left, you're gonna add 3, if you're going to the right, you're subtracting 3. So in this case, it's plus 3, since it's going to the left, squared to keep the square from the original function, plus 1 to keep the plus 1 from the original function. It's also asking us to do the reflection about the y-axis, about x-axis, which will give us the fact that f is turning negative. You're gonna bring down whatever you got from here, x plus 3 squared plus 1. So the only thing that changes is the negative f, which gives us the fact that this is gonna flip to the negative side. So instead of going up, it's gonna be going down, and your minimum is gonna turn to your maximum point. It's also telling us that it will be translated 2 units down, which, let's bring down everything we got from here. So it's negative f, x plus 3 squared plus 1. This gives us the fact it's going down, so it's negative 2. We're gonna add that. F of x plus 3, 2. 1 minus 2 gives us negative 1. So your actual function, your g of x, equals to negative f, x plus 3 squared minus 1. So this is your function I'll be using for your graph. So let's continue with the third question. So we ended up with the function of negative f, parentheses x plus 3 squared minus 1, which equals your g of x. This is your new function right here, right? So in order to graph this in the graph, what you would have to do is create a new set of x values, and then this function will determine our y's. So we can use negative 6, negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, and 0. So what we're gonna do here is we will be substituting these values into the x, into the function, in order to get our y value, right? So let's find g of negative 6. So we're gonna write the same formula, which is, you're gonna keep the negative, since I know the f is basically your 1. So keep the negative, substitute the negative 6 plus 3 squared minus 1. So you're gonna orders of operation. So you do parentheses first. Negative 6 plus 3 gives you negative 3. Squared gives you negative 9. bring down the negative. Negative 9 minus 1 equals negative 10. So we know that when x equals negative 6, y equals negative 10. So we're going to do the same thing for all the other ones. So we do g of negative 5, obviously. We do the same thing. Negative 5 plus 3 squared minus 1, orders of operation, negative 5 plus 3, negative 2 squared minus 1. We do exponents first, obviously, so you do 4 multiplication, negative 4 minus 1 gives you negative 5. So we know that when x equals negative 5, y is also going to equal to negative 5. So let's find, we keep going. G of negative 4, we do the same thing we've been doing, obviously. So we do negative, parentheses, minus 4, plus 3 squared minus 1. We bring down this, negative 4 plus 3, keep the sign of the bigger number, 1 squared minus 1. Do exponents first, gives you 1. Multiplication of the negative, negative 1 minus negative 1 equals negative 2. So we know that when x equals negative 4, your y is going to equal to negative 2. Let's keep going. G of negative 3, so we do the same thing. Negative, parentheses, negative 3 plus 3 squared minus 1. So this already gives you 0. Let me fix this. Negative 3 gives you 0. So 0 squared gives you 0 minus whatever that doesn't exist, minus 1, which leaves you off with negative 1. So when negative 3 is your x, negative 1 will be your y. We're almost done, right? Then we do 3 more. We do negative, parentheses, minus 2 plus 3 squared minus 1. Negative 2 plus 3, keep the sign of the bigger number. So it's 1 squared gives you 1. Bring down the negative, minus 1 equals negative 2. So when your negative 2 is your x, your y will also be your negative 2. Then, you can see a pattern here. 2, 2, this will most likely be negative 5 and negative 10. This will be should be your maximum point. So let's continue, we're almost done. G to the negative 1, G to negative 1, then we do minus 1 plus 3 over 2 minus 1. Keep the bigger sign of the number, 3 minus 1 is 2. 2 squared gives you 4. Bring down the negative sign. Negative 4 minus 1 gives you negative 5. So when x equals negative 1, y equals negative 5. And then we are going to do g of 0, right? So it's negative sign, 0 plus 3 squared minus 1. So 0 plus 3 is obviously 3 squared. Bring the squared sign, minus 1. This gives us 9. Bring down the negative and bring up the negative 1, which gives you negative 10. So when 0 equals x, negative 10 is going to be your y coordinate, right? So let's switch it to the other side. So we know that these will be your new coordinates, right? So let's write our new coordinates around here. So we can do x, y, So your new coordinates were -6, -5, -4, -3, -2, 1, and 0. And they gave us -10, -5, -2, -1, -2, -5, -10. So we can first graph the original function, which your original function is f of x equals x squared plus 1. Right. So we will obviously use our first coordinates. Right, so we know, I'll write them down here. So your x's and your y's were, so it's -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So we know -3 gave you 10. -2 gave us 5. -1 gave us 2. 0 gave us 1. 1 gave us 2, 5, and 10. So we could easily plot this down, right? So let's plot -3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 10. So we know that's -3, 10. Let's plot the second one, which is 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then -1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, so let's continue. So we see this is the f of x function. This is the g of x function. So the similarities, I guess, we could see are the numbers for the y's. So as you can see, the y's are positive here, and the y's here are negative, right? And then here we obviously have different x values, different x values. So then the next step is to graph the functions. So I start by graphing x squared plus 1. So let's follow the -3. So it's 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10, 2, just 1, 2, -2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then -1, just 2, 1, 2, and then so you can see there, 0, 1, and then 1, 2, 2, 5, 3 is 10, so you go all the way up over here. So as you can see, this is your f function, and then that's not the best, but you know that this is your fx equals x squared plus 1. Now let's graph this one. We graph the g of x function, which we could do. Okay, so I made the graph a little better. So you know it's continuous, so we put the arrows. Then let's graph the g of x function. So let's graph, so when x is a -6, your y is a -10. So you go back to the graph, -6 to -6, oh, it's -10. Go down, 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 here. Then we do -5 is x, your y is also -5. So -5, -5, then your -4, when x is -4, y is -2. So -4, -2. Then when your -3 is your x, your y is your 1. Do 1, 2, 3, -1. And then when your -2 is an x, your y is also -2. So -2, -2. when your -1 is your x, -5 is your y, -1, 5, and when x equals 0, y equals -10. We go from 0 all the way down over here. So we can do the graph. It's also continuous, and we can label this with your g of x, which equals -f, parentheses x plus 3 squared, which is outside the parentheses, minus 1. So we can see how your maximum point is your -1, and here your minimum point is your +1. Let me add it with this one, which is 1. So you can see this is your minimum point, and this is your maximum point, right? So the last portion, or the last thing they ask us for number 3 is finding the domain and range for g. So as we can see, this is our g function. This is all we're gonna worry about, right? So then let me erase these, right? So you can write it here. So we can see that your domain is just, since it's, what's it called? It's going down, it's continuous. Your domain will vary for sure. And it will eventually reach all real numbers. So your domain is your x's and your ranges are your y's. We know that. So then your domain will be x is an element of all real numbers. So this is your answer for your domain. And for your range, we know that -1 is your maximum point. So it would be your range, your range will be y is an element of all real numbers, being y is less than or greater than, less than or equal to -1. So these are your domain, and this is your range. So I think that is it for this question. So for sure, your g function, as stated before, is -f x plus 3 squared minus 1. And these are your domain and ranges. Let me just double check everything's right. Everything should be right. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention and for listening. Thank you. Bye. So let's continue. So we know that, like I said before, this is your maximum point. Since your parabola is continuous, your domain will eventually reach all real numbers. So we can say your x, we can say your x is an element of all real numbers. So that is your domain. And for your y's, so your ranges, since this is your maximum point, this will be included in your range. But other than that, it would also be continuous after this point. So it would be y is an element of all real numbers when y is less than or equal to, when y is greater than or equal to, nope. So let's continue. So we know that this is your maximum point, and since your parabolas are continuous in this case, it will keep going down and further down, so your domain will eventually reach our real numbers, which goes basically all the way to negative infinity. That's what we're thinking. So all we're doing is it will be x is an element of our real numbers. So we know that because it's continuous, your domain will reach all these numbers. It will go further down. It could reach the fourth quadrant, and etc. This quadrant over here. So it's first, second, third, fourth. Then your range, on the other hand, since it does begin here, this is your maximum point, this will be included in your range. So we do, but it would also be continuous, it's going further down. As domain goes down, as domain increases, it would also, well, basically it won't increase, but as it keeps going further down, your domain will get bigger and bigger, and it will expand. So will your range will go further down. For example, here, this point, etc. So it would be y is an element of our real numbers when your y is less than or equal to your maximum point, which is -1. And this is because, like I said before, this is your maximum point. It won't get any further up than this. It would only decrease. Since the further you go down, the less it goes, the less the y goes, if that makes sense. For example, let's say y is, for example, here, so this is your 10. So -10 is less than -1. So that's what this means. So any value here, including -1, could be included here because it's the equal to sign. But for example, -2, it is valid since -1 is bigger than your y, which is your -2. So thank you for watching and listening. But we could say that this is your g function, and this is your domain and ranges. Thank you. Okay, so I made the graph a little better. So you know it's continuous, so we put the arrows. Then let's graph the g of x function. So let's graph, so when x is a -6, your y is a -10. So you go back to the graph, -6 to -6, oh, it's -10. Go down, 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 here. Then we do -5 is x, your y is also -5. So -5, -5, then your -4, when x is -4, y is -2. So -4, -2. Then when your -3 is your x, your y is your 1. 2, 1, 2, 3, -1. And then when your -2 is an x, your y is also -2. So -2, -2. When your -1 is your x, -5 is your y. So -1, 5. And when x equals 0, y equals -10. We go from 0 all the way down over here. So we can do the graph. It's also continuous, and we can label this with your g of x, which equals -f. parentheses x plus 3 squared, which is outside the parentheses, minus 1. So we can see how your maximum point is your negative 1, and here your minimum point is your plus 1. Let me add it with this one, which is 1. So you can see this is your minimum point, and this is your maximum point, right? So the last portion, or the last thing they ask us for number 3, is finding the domain and range for g. So as we can see, this is our g function. This is all we're gonna worry about, right? So then let me erase these, right? So you can write it here. So we can see that your domain is just, since it's, what's it called? It's going down, it's continuous. Your domain will vary for sure. And it will eventually reach all real numbers. So your domain is your x's and your ranges are your y's. We know that. So then your domain will be x is an element of all real numbers. So this is your answer for your domain. And for your range, we know that -1 is your maximum point. So it would be your range, your range will be y is an element of all real numbers, being y is less than or equal to -1. So these are your domain, and this is your range. So I think that is it for this question. So for sure, your g function, as stated before, is -f x plus 3 squared minus 1. And these are your domain and ranges. Let me just double check everything's right. Everything should be right. So yeah, thank you so much for your attention and for listening. Thank you. Bye.